We've been having a spirited discussion this week over the plans of the Democratic majority to break the rules, to change the rules. That's how my friend from Nevada repeatedly described it when Republicans considered doing something similar several years ago, but wisely chose not to. At the end of the following year, my friend was poised to become Senate Majority Leader. This was back in 2006. With the experience of having served in the minority in his mind, the Majority Leader, the soon-to-be Majority Leader, the senator from Nevada, made a commitment to practice the golden rule, as he put it, by running the Senate with respect for the rules and for the minority rights the rules protect. Unfortunately, he appears to have repudiated that clear commitment. Unfortunately, he no longer recognizes, as Senator Byrd did, by the way, that the Senate was not established to be efficient, but to make sure minorities are protected. Then my friend recognized that is what the Senate is all about. That's what he said back then. Now he says the primary consideration is, quote, efficiency, end quote. He seeks to minimize concerns about this majoritarian power grab by characterizing the effect as tiny, just a little change, a minor change, as changing the rules just a little bit. But when one of my new members asked the Majority Leader if this change occurred, what recourse he would have to ensure he ever got an amendment to the bill, the Majority Leader quipped, quote, "You can always vote against the bill," end quote. In other words, my friend from Nevada acknowledged that if this change occurred, the minority will no longer have any ability to ensure that it and those whom it represents have a meaningful voice in the legislative process. My new colleague was surprised, but I can't say I was. After all, the Majority Leader brazenly told Senator McCain that, quote, "the days of amendments are over," end quote. And the record of the Democratic leadership, of course, backs this up. It is engaged in a systematic effort to use and abuse Senate procedures to marginalize the voice of the minority in the legislative process. Let's review the record. It used to be unprecedented, let me start over. It used to be unprecedented to use Senate Rule 14 frequently. This rule allows the majority to bypass committees and write bills behind closed doors. Doing so deprives all senators, Republicans and Democrats, of the chance to have their committee work actually make any difference. According to the Congressional Research Service, the majority has used this rule to bypass committees nearly 70 times. 70 times. When Republicans were last in the majority under Senator Frist, we used that rule less than half as often, only 30 times to be specific, which is a much lower rate proportionately speaking. When a bill that has bypassed committee goes straight to the floor under the current Democratic leadership, there often isn't an opportunity to participate there either. In fact, according to the Congressional Research Service, the current Democratic leadership continues to break records there as well. It has blocked senators from both sides of the aisle from offering amendments on the floor 68 times. 68 times. That's a conservative figure, in which the majority has simply made it impossible for any senators to offer any amendments on the floor. For if the Democratic leadership indicates that it won't let us offer any amendments to a bill, and in response we don't allow the majority to get on the bill, then there is no tree to fill that shows up in the statistics, but there is a filibuster. Of course, the filibuster statistic doesn't indicate the reason for the filibuster in the first place. Let me say that again. The filibuster statistic doesn't indicate the reason for the filibuster in the first place. But even this conservative figure is 70% greater than the number of times the 6 prior majority leaders combined shut their colleagues out of the amendment process. Now our friend, the Majority Leader, cavalierly dismisses this unprecedented blocking of senators of both parties from offering amendments. He said this behavior has, quote, "no bearing on what's going on around here," end quote. It has, quote, "no bearing on what's going on around here." Well, maybe in his mind it doesn't, but that's a pretty convenient and frankly self-serving attitude coming from the one who's picking the amendments. It's a little bit bigger deal to the other 99 of us who don't get to offer any amendments when our constituents elected us to be a meaningful voice for them. Now, of course, that wasn't the majority leader's view when he was in the minority and had to live under that procedure. Senator Frist, as majority leader, blocked his colleagues from offering amendments a relatively modest 15 times in 4 years. 15 times in 4 years. Do you know what the reaction of my friend from Nevada was when Senator Frist did this a relatively modest number of times over 4 years? He said it was, quote, a bad way to run the Senate, end quote. He said it was, quote, very bad practice, end quote. He said it, quote, runs against the basic nature of the Senate, end quote. Well, if it was a bad way to run the Senate, if it was a very bad practice, if it ran against the basic nature of the Senate to do it 15 times in 4 years, what would be the fair way to characterize the practice when it happened nearly 70 times on bills, especially when many of those never went through committee? Is it fair to conclude that this sort of stewardship of the Senate might be more than just a few tweaks shy of how this institution, which is supposed to protect the rights of all senators, including those in the minority, is supposed to function? But the current Democratic leadership wasn't content to stop there in marginalizing the minority. Because the minority isn't allowed to offer amendments in committee and isn't allowed to offer amendments on the floor, some of our members began to put forth legislative ideas by moving to suspend the rules. This wasn't exactly a level playing field for us because of the requirement in the Senate rules that motions to suspend the rules receive 67 votes to prevail. But even if the deck was stacked against us, it was a chance for us to put our ideas and those of our constituents before the body. Well, of course, that was even too much legislative freedom for the majority. Even if the majority started with a 27-vote built-in advantage under the rules to defeat these motions, having to bother with them was just too much of a bother. It got in the way of efficiency. So the majority leader used a simple majority to change Senate procedure to shut down the minority there, too. But even that's not enough. That's not enough. The same Democratic leadership now wants to take away the right to extended debate on motions to proceed to a measure. Don't worry, they say. Don't worry about it. Trust us, they say. We would never take away the right to extended debate on the measure itself. Really? Really? In light of the systematic effort to marginalize the minority at every turn, are we supposed to believe that the current majority won't subsequently cite efficiency as a reason to take away that Senate rule as well? Are we supposed to believe this assurance when the Democratic leadership so easily discards past unequivocal commitments to respect the rights of the minority? On the record of this Democratic leadership, there is no basis, none, to believe that the proposed changes are, quote, tiny, end quote, that they are, quote, minor, end quote, that they would affect the Senate just a little bit, or that they would stop there. To my colleagues who've never served in this body in the minority, who've never served under different leadership, this is not how the Senate's supposed to function. And to my Democratic friends in particular, who have never served in the minority, but no doubt will at some point, are you prepared to live under the rules you're now demanding? Are you prepared to be shut out from even offering amendments when the shoe is on the other foot? Now, we in the minority cannot fairly expect the majority to allow us to offer every amendment we would like to a bill. I understand that. We need to exercise self-restraint and good judgment as well. We know we will not get every amendment we would like to offer. But the majority cannot prevent us from offering amendments in committee, block us from offering amendments on the floor before cloture, and change Senate procedure so it can rule out of order motions we would like to offer after cloture, and then turn around and assert that these systemic practices, quote, have no bearing on what's going on around here, end quote. That's an abdication of responsibility. So I would encourage my friend, the Majority Leader, not to employ a heavy-handed procedure that, with the House of Representatives in control of Republicans. Important to note here, what short-term advantage would be gained by all of this nuclear option activity? The House of Representatives is in the hands of my party. So you will have degraded the Senate, created a bad precedent the next time you're in the minority, and sent measures to the House that will go nowhere. But in the long term, it will establish a precedent for breaking the rules to change the rules that our Democratic colleagues will have to endure when they are next in the minority. Now, what we should be doing, Madam President, we should work together on a bipartisan basis to resolve our respective differences. That is what the standing rules of the Senate anticipate. And that has been how changes to Senate rules have occurred in the past. We can reach agreement, as previous majority leaders have done, without making the Senate irrelevant. The time for the Majority Leader and myself to discuss these matters has come.